How do I validate that that person, when I put them on keyboard in the SUC, are they going to be able to continue to perform? And are they a team member?
There is a difference between the theoretical to the practical, and everybody's going to react differently.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cyber Rangers Uncovered. In this episode, we're exploring what it really takes to build cyber readiness, moving beyond certifications and technical training to develop skills, decision-making, and operational proficiency needed for today's complex threat landscape. I'm joined by Luis Velazquez from Levato and Anthony Perkins from Cyber Rangers to discuss how wargaming, simulation, and realistic exercises are helping organizations prepare for modern cyber conflict.
I'm Luis E. Velazquez. I'm a retired United States Marine back in 2008, and I'm also a retired federal employee. I was the Chief Technology Officer for the Marine Corps out of Quantico Marine Corps Base that I just retired from last year in October of 2025. My background is extensively military, was in communications as well as modeling simulation, working a lot of the live virtual and constructive integration efforts to support training and education.
I'm Anthony M. Perkins, 28 years United States military, retired as well. And currently I am the head of sales in the Americas for state, local, municipality, education, and defense for Cyber Rangers Corporation.
As we know, organizations invest heavily in cyber tools and training, yet many still struggle to determine whether they are truly prepared for a crisis. In your opinion, professional opinions, what would you think is missing from how organizations approach cyber readiness today?
So what I discovered is that in the recent couple of years before I retired from the federal side, we needed to push down more awareness of cyber to the common everyday employee within the federal government. And that was a good initiative, but the approach I think could be improved a bit. We definitely don't have the situational awareness where everyone should be able to respect an email that comes in that looks fishy. They still open it and can compromise a network. So I think it's the awareness factor and the ability to provide that familiarization orientation for them to obtain that knowledge at a different stage of employment. Clearly, you have the high-end employers that you bring in to safeguard the network, but it's the day-to-day trons that we deal with at the business level where sometimes a vulnerability exists, and it's simply because of a lack of awareness.
For an answer, I'll take Luis's cyber hygiene and take it to another level, which is the realism as well as the integration of current advanced persistent threats. Our adversaries are moving at a very quick speed. We are moving in somewhat of a lockstep. I think our challenge has always been, what is our practice ground? So while we continue to improve the cyber hygiene that Luis brings up, where everyday average daily users who don't know the difference between tool A, tool B, however, those operators that are on that wall, so to speak, or in that scheme of maneuver, also need to have a practice ground and a training ground that allows for the realism of being on net in mission. It'd be a very bad situation if Marines and across the globe didn't train with the weapons that they're going to use in that combat scenario.
So to your point, whether it's cyber readiness, hygiene, or having that training ground, would you say that organizations are relying too heavily on certifications, academic training, and compliance frameworks as indicators of readiness?
I think we need to have some sort of standardized way of measuring not only the readiness of our force, so that we have leveraged certifications, training experiences, events, but the part that I think is the over-reliance on just having those is, as Perk identified, is the ability to stress them under conditions that they feel it's real as well, not just these exercises where someone comes in and participates in a cyber awareness event as part of a large-scale exercise, but their part is so minimal, they don't feel the full weight, the full responsibility, or the stress of being able to accomplish under duress those sets of reps that are necessary so they can be effective in combat.
There are not enough cyber operators as well as cybersecurity professionals. And when you provide a resume that is static, that's got certification 1, 2, 3, or how long I've been in an environment, does not work necessarily with the competency requirement and being stressed. If you notice that in a lot of the resumes or the job requirements say, hey, you need to have 3 to 5 years worth of basic experience to even get into the job market. Well, how does a current graduate or even someone who comes out of high school with a lot of certificates get 3 to 5 years. Not to even mention, how do you go from commercial civilian industry to get a security clearance without having some level of military or federal service that allows you to get the security clearance? So with these two major deficiencies that are focused on the compliance, which you need compliance. Now, compliance is different from the personnel. When an Alicia or Luis and Anthony say, hey, here's what I did, where is your record that states that you can go do this, not only in a classroom environment, but also maybe potentially in the mud where things are not going like you're supposed to. However, the comment that is always made when I deal with other of our brothers and sisters are, well, how do I validate that somebody wasn't a great test taker? How do I validate that that person, when I put them on keyboard in the suck, are they going to be able to continue to perform? And are they a team member? Are they a team chief? Or there's someone that we're going to look forward to, like Luis, to go from X amount of years in the Marine Corps to X amount of years in the federal service as a leader, and eventually, as he finally comes out of that, to be a chief technical officer or chief technology officer for a corporation. That's a different level that there's probably no path that says this is how you get it done unless you talk to Luis or Alicia or Perk in that schematic.
I'd like to add to that because Perk hit right on it. There is a difference between the theoretical to the practical, and everybody's going to react differently. And you do have to use those metrics to figure out who needs to be strengthened up on areas they have certain weakness. And at the same time, as a leader, when you're recognizing the individuals under your command, you recognize someone has some strengths that weren't there before, and you can play those strengths and have them perhaps help develop some other tactics, techniques, procedures to better the defense or the offensive capability of a unit. So there's a big gap between the theoretics to the practical, and I'm sure industry is trying to solve that same problem as well.
So despite there being a gap between, having this lab environment, let's say in the real world, whether it's a cyber range environment, tabletop exercise, or, red teaming, those tend to be quite commonly understood by now, but cyber wargaming, however, is emerging as a critical capability for both defense and critical infrastructure organizations. I'm curious how you might define cyber wargaming and how it differs from traditional cyber exercises or cyber training.
Capture the flag, by definition, or have questions embedded, and you're trying to find a key string amongst some things based on the questions being asked. Because what I don't want to do is, first time I show up to support on your network or in your environment or your backyard, and I have no idea what left and right bounds are, and I'll add in another piece that when we start talking, we sometimes fixate and focus on cyberspace operations. We then transition to multi-domain operations, and we leave out, as we've seen in most of our most recent conflicts, the consolidation of critical infrastructure. That now it's asymmetric in manner. And there's a big difference between capture the flag, which is a skill scenario, readiness collaboration, or as you're saying, wargaming, which is literally from strategic requirement through operations to a tactical level of execution, understanding rules of engagement, understanding commander's intent, understanding what is also in a geopolitical realm of what you can and cannot do. Because sometimes the tactical level wants to escalate way faster than the strategic level or the rules of engagement allow.
So the cyber wargaming aspect is very close to me because I do all types of wargaming, especially as the CTO for Levato. That's exactly what we do, digital wargaming. And we also want to incorporate cyber to the effect where it has value for not only the trainer, but also to the scenario. So what we have in legacy cyber war games, the tabletop, the analytic war games, the future force design war games, staff level training war games, to even include cyber for large scale exercise war games. Let me give an analogous to an individual who comes in and he has his role when in the lab, the cyber lab, is probably to open up some shells, terminals, and go after SCADA, and probably go after the grid, the grade, kind of stay in the Article 4 area response of NATO before we go kinetic in Article 5, right? And this is a war game, not actual, right? Because we haven't done the Article 5s at once. But we look at the ability to bring that individual in. When you're doing a large-scale event, you have all the strategic planners in there, you have all the tactical planners, but you need to incorporate the cyber because they're very much part of the fight. they are operational. It's almost like logistics today, because the war front doesn't have any rears anymore. Logistics is operational, so you got to include cyber from day one. And when they get a chance to play in the war game, the cyber war game, their effects have to be felt, and they have to be able to feel the pressure of going in and either shutting down the grid, jamming the enemy radar systems, whatever the cyber capabilities they're going to do and tie in with EW. They have to feel that it's part of it. What they need to do is what we're trying to build over with Levato and teaming with partners that have cyber ranges and cyber effects, is to let them stimulate the constructive simulations in the game to shut down a grid. See what happens not only to the forces on the ground, but also to the local populace, to even impact their social media. So the cyber ranges have all types of second order, third order effects that can really make the game, for those that are looking at Article 4 in NATO response, to say at this time the public is outraged because they lost their grid. They're in freezing weather for the fourth night because every time they try to turn on the power grid, there's a cyber effect that takes it off the grid, takes it off the net. So those second order, third order effects, they get to test it. So long-winded in this effect, but what I'm saying is that we have to integrate in cyber wargaming, compared to typical tabletop and some digital aspects of wargaming, the cyber effects have to be integrated so it has meaning, so that those individuals that are actually the cyber professionals feel that they're part of the pace of the fight, and that commanders can take in their input at the strategic level.
To that point, I was actually going to ask if you could walk me through the concept of multi-domain exercises with potentially even a concrete example of its application and benefit.
In the wargaming, which we do in a digital sense of representation of the real world, we do represent the multi-domain aspects of combat. So we go, if you look from the top all the way down, from space with cyber space, and bringing in satellites and communications and intelligence, then to air assets, then air assets talking to surface assets that are on the waves, to those on the ground, and then those that are below the ground, which is below the sea, which is the subsurface. So we can model all aspects of the fight. Now in multi-domain, bringing in the cyber, you bring in that non-kinetic and that kinetic aspects of what cyber brings to the table, and you model that into the multi-domain, and they could impact all those. They can go across the entire threshold of, like, as Perk brought up, an excellent example. You know that you have a certain time on target for where you're going to bring your air assets above an enemy platform that could provide a defense for the enemy. If you can shut that down, so that the time that they're over it, there's no opportunity for them to engage their weapon systems. That's the type of stuff that we need to be able to train, and we can do that, or we can simulate, and we can do that in our digital model, and that's where the multi-domain operations occur. You can represent it, and you can impact it, and you can see the effects, and you can make informed decisions on what to do next as a result when running a multi-domain operation or war game. You have your red cell, which is the bad guys, the blue cell, which is the good guys, and the white cell, which is the adjudicators that are in the exercise room, seeing the entire play. If it's turn-based, they adjudicate. If it's letting them go through, make one decision and watch the effects occur through multiple iterations without human-in-the-loop interactions, then the white cell can still intervene and lead to make sure that the game stays on the scope of what the war game is supposed to cover. Because sometimes the war game could deviate if you don't have a white cell that allows the players to stay in the container they're supposed to operate in.
I give an example that may hit more of our commercial aspects. Low intensity conflict. Imagine you're going to use your credit card or go to get money out of an ATM on a financial structure, and it says NSF, insufficient funds, or Alicia's account no longer exists. Imagine that in a geographic region where all those people now have that situation going on. How quickly would you have, depending upon, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 nations, start to collapse just over where your money moves? That starts to affect the way people do business. A lot of times we always look multi-domain, we'll automatically go to a simulation of non-kinetic and kinetic encounters between two. And we've seen that by geographic regions, by shutting down certain choke points and or removing certain accesses that, as Luis said, only like logistics or transportation. Those are all low-intensity conflicts that could be examples of that multi-domain and or live virtual construct that affect populations. And we all need to train to all those type of things.
Perk raising a really good point there. The road to war for war games is not just when two forces engage and go kinetic. There's something we call the road to war. And everything that he just brought up would be in that scenario, part of the concept to explore. And there would be what you call injects. And you can list out all these things that would make things absolutely miserable on the pattern of life of the enemy. So hopefully that you would gain the enemy's population to go against their own country, right? That they want them to surrender because they're so miserable. And these are all the type of things that the intelligence communities work on, and then they coordinate with the cyber folks, and then of course with the military being the extension of the political will. These are all the type of things that happen in that road to war mapping. So yeah, Perk, you brought up a very, very good point there.
Cyber operations rarely are happening in an isolated way, and more so in this multi-domain engagement, whether military, civilian, or a combination of the two. How would you say this has changed the way organizations, including cyber commands, think about readiness and resilience?
The change in readiness postures and requirements have never really waned. I think the bigger challenge has always been, how do we meet the readiness requirements? One, are the readiness requirements, as Luis brought up in those classified arenas, do they even correlate today? I remember when I was in command, I used to look at my miscaps and everything else and go, wait a minute, they've still got me organized as a unit that was a decade ago. They've renamed me, rebadged me, re-given me something else, but I'm still reporting on pieces of equipment that are sitting in I call the boneyard or the warehouse that I've never turned on. Where are we going to next? So the big piece with readiness, I believe, is not just, and it's expensive. When we start looking at a budget on an annual basis, it becomes an expensive item for readiness. We sometimes, in a time of more peace than less peace, are always fixated on the budget for readiness until we have to put men and women in harm's way. And then you start trying to put a value on one single life. That's it's immeasurable. It's unfathomable, that kind of thing. So I think that when you ask the question about cyber commands and their entities, as well as the rest of those commands, readiness has always been part one. Readiness is also the way you force project. Do you even want to get into a fight? Maybe not. They seem prepared, they're ready, they're always at a moment's notice, those type of things. But I think it becomes a readiness over priorities within the time frame or the time spent. This is why we put it as a number one priority today, and it may move around, but it takes a while to get that proper sight picture from that vantage point on how important readiness is in comparison to tools, training, and everything else.
Yeah, so a really good point about the impact of what I've discovered from observing Ukraine, and our tool from Levato is being leveraged by the folks in Ukraine to help them war game aspects. So very proud to say that our team is doing its part. But what we've discovered from wartime, now that it's kinetic, now that it's gone to competition mode between Russia and Ukraine, is the speed of innovation is something that I've never seen during my entire time in the federal service, in the Marine Corps, in that war. Is they fail fast, they learn from that, they take measures to then replicate the success, speed it out, and then until the enemy comes up with a way to counter it, they're continuing to leverage it. And then when it's done, they throw it to the side and are constantly innovating. So what Ukraine has taught us is the speed of innovation in conflict, in wartime, is one where you do not take the long route of acquisition process where you do your desired capabilities, you generate the requirements, you fight for a program of record and plumbing process. You then fund a program to stand up. You then work with industry and get bids, and then you start fielding and sustain it. You work almost 10 times faster than our special operation forces and SOCOM work, where you give them the ability to spend, the ability to research, ability to learn, fail fast, implement, and then move on. And there's no second thoughts. They know every lesson learned from a trial is something that goes into the next iterative process to make their offensive weapons better. Which you're seeing what's happening right now in Ukraine with Crimea. Excellent example, how they are isolating the Russians at all logistic choke points on the Crimea. This is all done through innovative systems that from cyber to kinetic warheads to penetrating drone technologies. All that is through the innovative process that you gather from leveraging faster than real-time acquisition process to what I need, field it, learn it, use it, and move on.
Yeah, Cyber Range has been working with the state-sponsored Secure Common Information Protection Organization in Ukraine since before the war started. You're even seeing that the Ukrainians are taking the fight inside the borders of Russia. And in one of the instances I leveraged some of the notes that General Pody provided to us, which were, if it wasn't for the 2,780 exercises and 200 plus critical infrastructure drills that Cyber Ranges provided the Ukrainian military to leverage, the Russian incursion would have moved further west faster. I believe he said something to the effect that a Russian operator can spool up an unmanned either drone of some type. They can get into the BIOS of that drone and figure out what the payload is, whether it's going to be kinetic for disaster or ISR. And if it's ISR, they can redirect some of those payloads so that the Russians are seeing what the Ukrainians want them to see versus the Russians seeing what they want to go after and look at. So that observe-oriented side act is very fast, very small. And you're seeing, again, that asymmetric capability of what you consider a very small nation in comparison to the size of Russia, holding its own and giving sometimes worse than it's been receiving.
Traditional cyber range environments train operators, while war games train decision makers. I leave the two of you to either agree with that or disagree with that. Regardless, how would you say that these approaches complement each other?
There are different types of war games, right? There are war games that are for future force design, things how you're going to fight 20 years from now. So not necessarily trying to stress the individuals, because the output of the war game is what you're looking for. Now, there are staff-level training war games where it's the impact on the human in the loop, that person making a decision. That's the goal of the war game. So there are different types of war games. And so in this case, for the cyber effects, I think we want to reorient the question to say it's not just two types of war games. There's multiple types of war games. What's applicable to cyber and how we should leverage that in terms of, we're talking about leveraging cyber ranges and wargaming, and how one would complement the other, how we how do we fuse them together, or how we normally say in a LVC language, how do we federate that those systems talk to each other so you have a seamless engagement for the training environment to give them the stress if you're doing a sets and rep type of training that they're going to fight tomorrow. They're going to do an op plan analysis of how they should fight maybe a week from now, or running a war game, how they're going to fight a future force that doesn't even exist 20 years from now. We should make sure we're addressing it correctly.
They're very complementary. I think the challenge is the nomenclature. Okay? When you think cyber range, a lot of people are thinking IP space. They're not thinking an environment that allows them to go left, right, up, down, and move at the speed of the tools they have on their hands, and or the Luis's perspective. What if we added this or took this away from you in this pace? Decision making, the critical thinking piece of our juniors, sometimes we think is remiss because they don't have the same experiences. In my service, I found out quickly that some of my junior airmen knew their tools better than I would ever have learned in any length of time, right? So their decision making to their experience level was very good. The piece was, well, how do I get them my 20 or 30 years of experience faster than them taking 20 or 30 years in their experience? So you end up with the complementary type of wargaming, which is to help them with critical thinking, understanding left and right bounds. How do we get nation A and nation B back to the diplomatic stage as well, going into kinetic warfare? Sometimes you use psychological operations or your cyberspace operators to help move one of those two back to the diplomacy conversation. That's a very high level of complementary efforts between the wargaming piece and a cyber range platform that allows for the movement of turning off a critical infrastructure piece, turning off someone's lights, camera during the middle of a meeting like this, to go, look, this is what we could do non-kinetically. Imagine if we actually wade into the arena and then tried to do kinetic, one for each other type of scenarios. You also have at the much lower level where it's very complementary is you take somebody out of the academic initial skills training and now get them the experience so that when they walk into an office with Luis and he asks, Alicia, what are you going to do about this problem? His trust level in your answer is a lot higher because your critical thinking and your decision making is based on a level of experience you've learned is very quickly that complements and supplements Luis's understanding of what the environment is in that piece. So it has to go together, hand in glove metaphor. It has to go left and right. It's the collaboration not only of the environments, but bigger I think it is of the team members working in collaboration. If you don't work with your allies, and some of those people that are allies during a certain environment and not allies in others' environment, you need to understand and trust what they are going to do and have an idea of what they're going to do.
Yeah, definitely allow the multi-domain operations, allows the technical mastery of your cyber expertise personnel to work with the operational decision makers who are running the strategic warfight. If they can be integrated, federated, so that the effects are shown and the strategic leaders can see the impacts and be better informed on what to do next in the war game, that's a plus. I do want to share an experience I went through almost 40 years ago when I started off as a sailor before I became a Marine. I was an enlisted sailor, and I would spend a lot of time reading up and running through, at the time, it's porous simulation, but I was an anti-submarine warfare person, so I would read up on Soviet tactics for their different type of submarines. I would run through the simulators in the classified space, and then we were in the Atlantic and we were persecuting a Soviet submarine that came into the North Atlantic. And I would remember when the anti-submarine warfare officer walked into the anti-submarine warfare room and we were tracking the contact, the commander came down to look at the scope, to look at the screen himself. And the anti-submarine warfare officer, who's supposed to be the senior officer for anti-submarine warfare, was advising the commander of the ship on what to do next. Now, I have gone through all these simulations and I read all these pubs. I was a geek. Everybody else would go out and party. I would still read, and I just couldn't get enough. And so I was really inside the mind of that Soviet sub. And as soon as the commander made his recommendation, the anti-submarine warfare officer made the recommendation to the commander of the ship, I had to intervene. I couldn't keep my mouth shut because I had run this scenario 1,000 times, and here it was, and I knew the decision he just advised the commander would make us lose the target. And so there I was as an E5. I turned around and I told the anti-submarine warfare officer in front of the commander, sir, if we do this, we will lose the contact. We have been tracking this contact for several hours. If we do that, we'll lose it. And he looked at me, and the captain, the ship looked at the anti-submarine warfare officer saying, what's going on here? But thankfully, the anti-submarine warfare officer realized I was saving him, because had we lost that contact, it would have been on him. That would have been his career. So we kept out the contact, all because I had spent the time in the training simulations. I had read the pubs. I had talked to senior leadership already in advance about this exercise we're about to do, this event we're going into the waters to track this particular submarine. We were successful in the acquisition. We were tracking it. We were reporting it. It was a fantastic event. I felt I was empowered because I had the experience of going through simulations. I had the experience of reading the tactical techniques and procedures of what a Soviet sub's supposed to do. And I had the trust of the crewmates that I was working with that I should say something to prevent the anti-submarine warfare officer from making a disastrous decision to the commander that would lose that contact. So the confidence, the hands-on, the rehearsal, the tactics, techniques, and the passion and working with everyone, that's where I believe you would have the equivalent of the cyber range and the war game tied in. Give that practice, give that sets and reps, see the impact so that they all learn and they can communicate with each other more effectively. So thank you for letting me relive a little bit of some history here.
Oh, thank you for that amazing example. I think that is key to not just understanding how, simulation and emulation environments, that training, that certification, all of that really does build up, like you say, to that confidence, to understanding the environment that brings you into the real world, which then you get that real world experience of saying, I actually know this because I did have my head buried in those books instead of going out and partying, to your point. Looking at, the future of wargaming and cyber range environments, how, for example, digital twins, simulations, and AI are increasingly being used to test new ideas and to, throttle forward and keep things moving at an ever quicker speed, building that into really kind of the future of cyber readiness. Final words, final thoughts of what the future might look like.
I believe this is exciting times, because if we look at when I was coming in, there was no laptops and computers and everywhere and networking. And today we have a generation growing up where they knew nothing but computers available to them. I could only imagine what 5-10 years from now, when the next generation being brought up knows a world where there was never AI. They are going to be the AI native, just like we call the folks the digital native that grew up with smartphones and technology. AI is everywhere. AI is constantly evolving. AI agents will be fighting each other in the cyberspace, where our systems are already being demonstrated by Palantir and other corporate entities that are building these phenomenal technologies that were able to do, just for instance, example of day one of the Iran strike, where there were more than 80 simultaneously hit targets at one time on a state that's twice the size of Texas at the same time. That could only be done through coordination of AI, because otherwise you would spend months and months in the planning just to be able to acquire what systems do we have currently available, what's the target carrying, what time should they launch. I mean, AI, the Palantir system was responsible for that. We should be looking at bringing in Project Maven. We should be bringing in cyber ranges. We should be bringing in war games, because and that reliance on AI is a reality. And if anyone who believes otherwise, they're denying the future. They're denying their ability to see and forecast. They're going to get stuck and they're going to be left behind.
I'll close with the future is now. But to Luis's point, I felt very confident when I finally retired, knowing that those folks coming behind me were learning faster, learning so much more, and they were comprehending it, that it was scary. It's almost as I felt, and as Luis will probably attest, when it's time to finally take that last flag folding, right? I was excited, but also knew that there's no way my learning capacity was going to be allowing me to go do some of these things, right? So in the cyber range environment with wargaming, I'm very excited with where we're going to go next. I'm very excited with how we're going to be able to integrate not only all of this wonderful technology, but also the human capital piece, which is, I think, the most important position of all of the pieces as we move left and right, is that how do we better position our human capital into being the best, whatever they want to be in the future, right? I would one day hope that in my wonderfulness of sitting down and quiet, that we don't need a kinetic operational construct as we've done for centuries. But overall, I'm very excited with the way technology is moving, how wargaming and cyber ranges platforms are being integrated so that we now know each other better. So I thank you, Luis, for your time. Thank you, Ms. Alicia, for inviting me again to be on Cyber Ranges Uncovered, and look forward to the next opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you, Perkins, and thank you, Alicia, and thank you for the opportunity. It's really great to talk with folks who have a similar history of working and taking care of people. It really is about taking care of the next generation. Thanks, team. I appreciate it.
That wraps up this episode of Cyber Ranges Uncovered. A big thank you to Luis and Perk for sharing their perspectives on cyber readiness, operational proficiency, and the role of wargaming and simulation in preparing organizations for increasingly complex cyber challenges. Stay tuned for more conversations shaping the future of cyber defense. See you next time.